Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson. And this week, unsurprisingly, we will be recapping the MLB Draft. And I got my buddy Geoff Pontes from Baseball America to help me with that. We'll have a big update to the top 400 prospect rankings next week. Really excited for that one. There's just going to be a ton of additions. I mean, obviously the draftees, but there's going to be, 50, 60 plus additions that weren't even part of this draft class. Just so much has been happening over the past 6 weeks or so. But Geoff, really appreciate you taking the time to be on. How you doing?
Pretty good, man. Yeah, it's been a whirlwind couple of days. I was out watching games in the Cape about a week ago, and flew out last Thursday to Los Angeles. We did a prospect pad event that we do before the Futures game. We interview players, etc. I was telling you a little bit about that off air. Saturday was the Futures game. Sunday was the draft. Monday we had the second round. Tuesday the third, or excuse me, second day. Tuesday the third day, finishing up the draft. So we were busy, just writing reports, all that sort of thing. I flew back on Monday morning, back east to Massachusetts. So landed, ate, rested up a little bit, and just got right back to writing reports and etc. yesterday. But we were able to get reports up for all players taken in the first 10 rounds of the draft. We had a sizable amount that were already ranked, within the top 500. But it was a really, really good weekend. Just got to, hang out with and work alongside my coworkers like JJ, Cooper, Kyle Glazer, Savannah McCain, and of course Carlos Collazo, who did a fabulous job on the on the broadcast. If you watch that in the draft, he's a dapper gentleman. So props to him.
Carlos was great.
Yeah, he's amazing.
I really appreciate you fitting this in. I mean, from the Cape to LA, and then you're going back to the Cape today. Just really appreciate you taking the time, man. You, I believe, were you the first person to tweet that Jackson Holliday was going to the O's?
I think I might have been. I saw that later on Twitter. I had it ready to go. We knew what the pick was few minutes beforehand. And I'll say this. I had heard a lot of rumors around, potentially Tamar Johnson. Of course, Drew Jones, as things developed over the week, we kind of had a pretty good certainty that he wasn't going one and that he was going to go two, and that Arizona had, met whatever number it was. But yeah, we had Holiday as the pick. We had it confirmed. So I had it ready to go on my screen. And as soon as the commissioner walked up there and said, the Baltimore Orioles select Jack, and I was click, it was like, all right, it's official. So I guess I beat Passan maybe by like a millisecond, but it didn't much matter. My tweet did not do the numbers that Passan's did. So did I win in the end?
And then you also, I think, wisely predicted the Texas double tap of the Boris pitchers when we obviously had the sort of surprise that Rocker went third, but then in hindsight, I mean, really kind of almost as soon as that happened, I was just like, oh, of course that's what Texas would do. Like it just made, like, I don't know if it's not necessarily what I would have done, but it just made so much sense that that's what they would have done. And, perfect guy to take third and go way under slot on, right? Because, he probably could have slipped quite a ways if he hadn't gone there. And then you save a ton of money and you get Brock Porter. What did you think of? I mean, we'll get to the exciting hitters and everything, but what did you think of that decision by Texas in terms of how they allocated those funds?
Yeah, I think the other thing to keep in mind when we discuss Texas's draft, and what I think was smart about it, is they only had 3 picks in the first 5 rounds. Within the top 10 rounds, they had 8 picks in total. So they had that big bonus up top, and what they were able to do is, in my opinion, get, arguably, I don't think there's too many people that had public boards that would really disagree with this, but they got 2 top 20 players, and I think you could argue the best college arm potentially, and the best high school arm potentially in this class. Neither of those statements are all that far off from the top. Porter was ranked within the top 2 to 3, I think, on a lot of boards as a prep arm. Kumar Rocker performed and looked like himself. And I think he was within that top, 2 to 3, 4 arms, especially in this college pitching class, which has obviously just been ravaged by injury. So his injury concerns were really no different. They're a little different, but not, on the surface too much different. So I thought it made a lot of sense. I had some information coming out of day 1 of the draft that this is what was going to happen. I had heard what the number was for Kumar and what the bonus was. I knew they were both Boris clients. And so I felt pretty comfortable to put it out there in a speculative measure without necessarily like full confirmation, but I knew that this was something that was developing and could happen pretty quickly. And remember, I think I was walking onto the plane at LAX and checked my phone, and there was the pick. Brock Porter went 109 to Texas. So I think it was a really good strategy for them because, like I said, they were limited in terms of picks, but not necessarily in terms of bonus. If they allocated it right at the top of the draft, they did so. They were able to pull that down. And then, I thought for me, I really liked their 7th rounder, Louis Ramirez, right-handed pitcher out of Long Beach State. We saw him pitch pretty well at the beginning of the season. He pitched really well for me on the Cape last summer. A couple times that I saw him, just it's a good 3-pitch mix, he can execute. So I thought they grabbed some other guys that were interesting as well. So, it wasn't all just, those 2 picks. I thought they did pretty well to add some arms into the system. They went with a couple of position guys, but they were really, really heavy in terms of going after pitching and college pitching in particular.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, they're doing everything they can to develop pitching and bring in high-end pitching. So the O's go with Jackson Holliday, and I think if they'd gone with Termar, I might have second guessed the move, but I think Holliday just makes a ton of sense when you kind of look at their org chart, and I think people maybe before the draft were sort of sleeping on just how high his ceiling is from a real life standpoint, especially given that he was the only shortstop that was going to stick at shortstop, who was in consideration to go top 5. What was your take on that decision by Baltimore?
Yeah, I think he was within a group of players at the top of the draft that there's no certainty, and there was once again a really talented positional crop of prep players. For me, just haven't been around the process for whatever, a year now, and I'm not necessarily somebody that's out at games watching a lot of prep guys. I leave that to some of my coworkers, some of my colleagues and friends like Brian Sikowski, even for Servino with Perfect Game, who are around these guys for 2-3 years sometimes. And I get a lot of insight from them just because I can't replicate that work with all the other things that I'm doing. And they all had different answers. I think some of them would say that Termar was the best prep player. You don't worry necessarily about the positional fit. You just look at the bat, the track record. This kid can hit. This was the best player on the college on the prep summer circuit. Last summer. There's a lot of people that believe in the athlete and just the long-term explosiveness of a guy like Elijah Green. Played, IMG Academy, which is the toughest competition you're gonna face in high school. I mean, it's just you're more or less like built into a pro athlete at an academy like that. Just the way that it works. Of course, we have Jackson Holliday, the bloodlines. He added tremendous strength between this time last year at PG National, where I think he was sort of on comp round to like early 2nd round radars, and just really transformed himself. He comes from a big baseball family. His grandfather's a coach up here on the Cape with the Chatham Anglers. His uncle, is the head of the Oklahoma State staff. His father, of course, is Matt Holliday, former MLB All-Star. So, he's got the bloodlines and obviously the work ethic. He got a lot stronger. I think there's still a lot of projectability in that frame. I mean, he looks really young. He looks like a kid, right? Shortstop skills are fine. Even if he moves to second base long term, I think his actions are good in the dirt. So you don't have to worry about that too much. There's going to be a position there. That's really the big thing, right? And that's sort of the group at the top. I mean, Cam Collier is a great talent. I like Cam a lot. I don't know if he's right within the cusp of that first group, and I think it's the reason that he went probably where he did in the board. But we may look back on this in a year, and he might be a guy that's hitting for average, getting on base, and showing some of that raw power he shows in batting practice and games. And we could be talking about a guy that everybody wants, particularly in fantasy.
So the thing that I, from a dynasty standpoint, the thing that I just keep thinking about from this draft is just that insane trio of hitting prospects the Diamondbacks now have with Corbin Carroll, Jordan Lawler, and Drew Jones. Like, I know that there was a time when, like, you had Julio Kelenic and Noelvi Marte, and maybe all three of those were top 10, top 15 dynasty prospects for people. But I wasn't as just really, really excited about that trio as I am this trio that Arizona has. And I'm wondering if you kind of agree with that, or if you can maybe think of a time when a team has had, because there's been times, the Jays had Vlad and Bichette, the Twins had, Buxton and Sano. There's been really high-end duos of position player prospects, but I really can't remember a time when I've been this excited about a trio of hitters that all three just have insanely high ceilings to be from a dynasty standpoint.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's kind of why I left Drew Jones. He's the best player in the draft. I think, according to pretty much everyone that you speak with, or a good chunk of it. I don't think there's any question there, or at least he's in the conversation. Projectable, power, contact, obviously center field skills. That's just innate and inherited from his dad. So no questions there. I thought it was interesting. I was in the call actually with Drew after he got picked, and he actually credited his maternal grandfather as, I think it was, I have to double check in the name, but I think it was Derek Jackson, was the guy who actually taught him how to swing and taught him his game, because his father was obviously on the road playing professional baseball. And he doesn't really remember the Braves times. It was more like being around like the Yankees clubhouse and that sort of thing. So real professional mentality. You could almost see him as like a Yankee. Obviously they didn't pick that high, but just in terms of like very like direct, well-spoken, like very polished. It's funny. Someone was saying it's like between him and like Tamar, it was like prep kids aren't supposed to have interviews that are like this good. So yeah. I think he's got that like other element to it. The tools are all there. Jordan Lawler's kind of the same thing. Corbin Carroll's the same thing. I mean, Corbin Carroll, I heard, was like a Mensa candidate or something. Like he was like, had a perfect SAT score. Like he's just a really like interesting, like engaging guy. Got to chat with him for a minute or two at the prospect pad, but yeah, I mean, they have just a wealth of talent. It's like looking back on some of those, like maybe like Red Sox systems but I don't even know if we thought like Mookie and some of those other guys were going to be that high end, but they had like Xander and, a few others, Devers, Moncada, Benintendi. That was one that kind of came to mind. Those Braves around the same time with like Acuna and, Albies, who was better than I think we even thought, but we did, obviously like him a lot. So it's funny. I don't think we've seen, sort of, even when you factor in like Alec Thomas, like who's a pretty good prospect and outfielder, they have like a really exciting core there, just of young players across the board at the major league level. They got Varsho, Ketel Marte, whatever that is, over the next couple of years. As things develop here, that's a really loaded system. They did pretty well, and even beyond just that pick, I thought Arizona did
yeah
the draft. Landon Sims, I think you could make an argument that he was the best college arm in the draft once he was healthy. Like there's so many guys that wore that crown throughout the year
I
that,
love Anderson.
hey, it's a good pick. And then you get Ivan Melendez, who's statistically the best college hitter this season. I don't know how it would translate, but there's power, there's contact, there's approach. He's a good first baseman. So we'll see what develops there. I mean, it was a good draft for them too.
Yeah, I mean there are deeper systems than Arizona's. Like I was going through Cleveland's system this morning, and they're just as deep as you can get. The Rays are just always deep. The Dodgers are always loaded. But I think you could maybe argue Arizona is the best system just because of that high end. I mean, that could be just three of the game's best position players in 5 years. And that Braves, like the Acuna, Albies, Austin Riley trio of young guys ended up just being a monster. But I don't think we thought those guys behind Acuna were quite at that level.
I thought it was Pache.
Right. But yeah, I mean, if I were a Diamondbacks fan, I'm going to be on Chris Welsh's pod tomorrow. I'm sure he's over the moon about this. It's an exciting time to be a D-backs fan. So the college guys, it's kind of a fun crop of college hitters. They don't kind of have the they don't generate the excitement that those top 4 prep guys do, really. But do you have a favorite college hitter in this class?
Yeah. As we go through it, there's a handful of guys here that are all within this conversation for me. I think Brooks Lee, of course, switch hitter. There's certainly some questions health-wise. He's had some back issues over the course of his career, but this guy hit 400 on the Cape with power. And he's not a shortstop, but he's an infielder, and I think he's probably fine at third base. He's built like a third baseman. He's got the arm to stick there. I don't think there's any questions. But he can hit. A lot of contact, easy power, especially from the left side. So it's a strong side, heavy profile for a switch hitter. And he's not a switch hitter I think is going to really struggle to make a lot of contact. He's somebody where it's pretty natural. His father is, the coach there at Cal Poly. So obviously he's been around baseball since the day he could walk, or even before that. Love Gavin Cross, left-handed bat. He's a really good athlete. I think he kind of gets undersold on that. It's a guy that can play center field. If he moves to a corner like right field long term, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but he's going to be an outfielder long term. There's no questions there defensively. That's valuable. Just as a guy moves up and doesn't have to struggle, can spend time working on his hitting. Hits for power. You look at the numbers. He hit everywhere. He was really loud at Team USA last year. He was loud here for a few games in the Cape. I mean, just great BPs. He's a guy that I think, has a fairly level swing. He's probably going to be able to, make some adjustments, add some more loft, add some more power to his game as he starts. So I wouldn't get too freaked out if the ground ball rates are in like the high 40s or something early. But he's going to balance, contact, approach, and power. So they're never going to be bad numbers. But I do like Gavin Cross a lot. Kevin Perrotta, I don't know if he's going to be a catcher. I don't think anyone really does. But just in terms of the bat, it's tough to question it. I mean, all he's done since the moment he stepped on the field, and really, even as a prep, it's just hit. He's performed. The bat's legit. He added strength this year, which added power to his game. There's bat speed. There's field to hit. There's approach. I don't have too many questions there. I like Jace Young a lot. Josh's younger brother. I liked him out here on the Cape while he was here for a few weeks. I knew he was bad down the stretch. I don't know if there was an injury or something. I think he hit like 220 or something the last month of the season. But he's got a track record. He's hit for a long time. There's pedigree. And he comes from a family of, another guy that can obviously hit. Unfortunately, he's been injured. That's another story. Love Zach Neto. He's explosive, plays a passionate brand of baseball. He's a true, shortstop. This guy's a 6 defender at short. He's got a great arm. He was coming on for his team and closing games for the Camels this spring. Really gritty kid. Loves to hit. I think there's funky swing. It's definitely got a fair amount of loft built into the bat path, but he makes a lot of contact. He knows how to adjust. I mean, the guy hit like 400 this year. Obviously knows how to hit. Had he not gotten injured on the Cape, maybe the third week of the season, he really severely injured his ankle. I don't think he broke it. I think he sprained it pretty badly. He probably takes the best player on the Cape award from Chase DeLauder just simply because he was a shortstop and was doing the same things that DeLauder was doing. Talk about gutty, comes back probably like 80%, 90%, and plays shortstop and helps his team win the Cape Cod League Championship last year. So there's some intangibles there as well. I like a scrappy player. So he's probably the last guy that I'd mention there. I do like DeLauder, but I think there's some questions just with the swing, how he's going to hit pro pitching, particularly left on left. But the abilities across the board, really good, and I don't think he's going to be a bad value or a bad target. Even in shallower dynasty leagues where, maybe you draft 24 to 30 FYPD guys with with the international kids mixed in. I still think he's somebody that's going to be drafted 100% across the board, but just maybe not in that top group.
Yeah, it's interesting with Neto and DeLauder. You obviously saw both of them on the Cape, and just from when I first started watching video on those two, I wasn't that like I had some questions. Obviously, you mentioned sort of Neto's funkiness pre-pitch, but the numbers are off the charts, and I haven't really spoken to anyone whose opinion I value who doesn't love Neto. And then DeLauder, I do have questions about how he would handle premium velocity and whether or not he is just going to end up being a strong side platoon guy, but another guy where both those guys didn't face great competition, but the numbers are pretty insane with him too.
Yeah, and he saw a lot of velo on the Cape. I mean, he saw good pitching on the Cape, DeLauder, and it's just it's one of those things where I think like he's just a super twitchy, explosive athlete that hasn't had wasn't in a big program. I think the right player development department, particularly Cleveland's, gets their mitts on him, and he sort of can iron out some of the stuff that he needs sort of fixed. But there's so much that he does well. And let's not he's not a big swing and miss guy. I think that everyone saw him in FSU that first weekend, and he struck out against Parker Meadows and Bryce Hubbard, who were one was a day one guy, the other one was early day two, within the first 10 picks of day two. These are legitimate arms at home opening weekend, and he has no protection in his lineup. I think he's actually, probably a guy that could make a pretty big jump, just simply because this guy was a three-sport athlete, a true three-sport athlete that, kind of got lost in the shuffle and didn't go to a lot of premier sort of prep events, stuff like that, showcase things, because he was playing other sports. Then once he committed, and he was a two-way guy for his first year or so too. So there's some things with DeLauder where it's kind of I don't want to get too lost in just a small sample, just because he's a freaky athlete. He's somebody that would play, linebacker or something. He's huge and just is a 60+ runner with, explosiveness, etc.
Yeah, so just from watching video, it just seemed like the swing was long. Is that unfair?
It's funny because his bat's in the zone for a long time. I think part of that is sort of his path isn't super lofty. It's kind of moderately lofty, I'll say, where he also kind of the way his front end kind of his explosiveness with his gait is so quick. And it's not in a way that he's cheating on it. It's short in some of those mechanisms. But I think there's certain pitch locations that can probably, get him. Like if you're a guy that's able to like land your breaking stuff sort of low and in on him, he has trouble adjusting to that at times. And I think that's what you saw like left on with two lefties, like with Messick and Hubbard, being able to sort of land the breaking stuff there or like fastballs high. So it's tough because I saw him so good for like 13 games. I mean, he was other than Brock Wilken, he was probably the best player in the Cape. And as an overall prospect, he was probably the best player on the Cape last summer. And he still hit after that opening weekend. The numbers were still like some of the best in the country prior to him getting injured. Yeah, I mean, I just think that, it's kind of like Colton Cowser now, right? Like smaller school guy, super tooled up, has like all these different abilities at the plate, but there's like some question to like some of the stuff that he does, struggles a little bit, and then like figures some things out, makes a couple of small adjustments. They call him up to Double-A, and I mean he's just been rocket since they promoted him. The numbers are like significantly better than they were. His strikeout rate is down. He's already got more homers in Double-A in like 16 games. So sometimes I think it's just a matter of like ironing out the kinks for some of those guys that didn't come from an Arkansas or an SEC powerhouse that has like all the best facilities, all the best development, all the best food. It's a different experience.
So speaking of, SEC powerhouse, one guy you didn't mention was Jacob Berry. He was only at LSU for 1 year, I believe,
Yeah.
but he was the first college hitter off
Yep.
the board. And, I think from a fantasy standpoint, it's almost surprising he was the first hitter off the board, just given all the concerns about his defense. But I haven't really heard anyone question the bat. Did you leave him out on purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I think that well, I have to see what the numbers are and what he signs for. I'm just not the biggest Jacob Berry fan. When we're talking about some of the guys in this draft between the prep players and some of these college guys that are a little bit more twitchy, like to me, Brooks Lee and Jacob Berry, similar switch hitters with power. I'll take Brooks Lee. you know, Berry's right there, but I also think that there's some level of concern for me, kind of like it has to be so good for that to work because he's like he can't play third base. He's a first baseman at best, and it might be a DH. He really has to hit, and there's just like I don't think he's gonna swing and miss like this. But like I don't know, there's just like Zach Collins vibes for me. Like I just feel like it's just such a bat heavy profile. I don't know. I mean, he's probably going to end up being a top 100 prospect and a superstar, like just because I said this, and I'm going to be here on a year from now. Like, yeah, Jacob Berry's a top 50 guy in fantasy. He can hit. There's no doubt about it. He hit at Arizona. He hit when he went to LSU. He hit at the Collegiate National. But how much better can he get? Like, he's going to add that much more power. Is he going to become a better contact hitter than he is? And there's a lot of good college hitters that had similar numbers across the board when you do some of those blind comparisons. So for me, I would have been comfortable taking Berry at like 16 to like 25. I would be fine in a real draft setting. 6 was a little rich for my blood, but I get it. There's a strategy there, and I'm certainly not in the room or a professional. So, I'm not knocking it at all. He was one of the top college hitters in the class. And there might even be some people in fantasy rankings that have him within the top 3 or 4 hitters in the draft. Maybe even as a top college hitter. I mean, he was the top college hitter drafted. So,
well, so
I can argue with there. It was higher than I would have anticipated, but we kind of knew that was what was going to happen.
I'll take Berry. We should do a bet. We should bet like we've never gotten to hang out in person, but we should do a bet on Berry versus Gavin Cross.
I'll take that
for dinner or something.
I'll take that.
All right, let's do it. So
what's the window here?
Well, I think in
like the first one to be a top 100 fantasy player.
I think with these two being, top 10 college draftees, like I think within like 3 years we should probably have a pretty good idea who won that bet.
Yeah, I agree.
All right.
2025 dinner.
When let's head to a quick break and get a message from our sponsors here. But when we come back, I'm gonna take a mini victory lap. But we'll be right back. All right, so Geoff, you were I believe the inventor of the Prospects Live mock draft. Is that true?
Yes.
Has anyone had a better pick than my Eric Brown pick of the Brewers at number 27 this year?
Yeah, my Cooper Jerpy pick. I wasn't picking for the Cardinals. Yeah, man, that was spot on. And a couple years ago, you took Kevin Perrotta, I think in the 2020 draft. So you've been doing pretty well. You've gotten really good value. And I love Eric Brown. I think he's another guy that is kind of like in that next group of college hitters, but isn't all that far off. Spencer Jones is another one. But yeah, man, you really nailed that one, huh?
I went and I looked that night to just double check, and of all 30 picks in this year's Prospects Live draft, I was the only person to get it correct, and it was at 27 on a player who I don't think was ranked as a top 50 prospect anywhere. So
should have been, though. I was hollering about that. I think he was on Perfect Game. Perfect Game, he was. I think those guys listened to me coming out of the Cape. And he snuck into the BA top 50, but I think he was like 47 or 40, 39, somewhere in that range at the end. He was a guy I was tracking because he was like, I was blowing up Carlos in in Slack. Like, dude, Eric Brown, he's got to be higher. I'm telling you, first round pick, it's going to happen.
I remember you're probably right that he did sneak in. I remember
I think toward the end,
a week or two ago, I think he was in the 50s. But
yeah.
So what can people expect from him because I remember texting you a couple of weeks ago and you said you clocked him as a plus runner. I don't know if anywhere has him actually listed as a plus runner.
It's not necessarily consistent, but he flashes plus run times. Like moving isn't an issue. He could steal bases. He played for Mike Roberts, which is Brian Roberts' dad and on the Cape, former UNC head coach. If you're familiar with it, he actually wrote like what's considered the Bible of base running. Mike Roberts did, and his teams like to run. And the guys that hit at the top of his order, like Brown did, and sort of the leaders on his squads, typically always can run. They have Enrique Bradfield coming in today. I'm going to see that. So, like Brown can run. Like even if it's like consistent 55s because he runs some 50s, that's fine. But I've seen him busted out of the gate, and really strong lower half. He's a good athlete. I don't think he's got the arm for shortstop, but he's fine at second base. Like he could be a really good defensive second baseman. Moving in both directions. He knows how to make that turn. That throw is perfectly fine with his arm. There's good approach. The numbers back this up. He doesn't expand the zone. Doesn't swing and miss a lot. It's an unusual setup. Once you get past that and you actually watch what he does in games over a large sample, and I mean, he's another guy that I saw a ton because Katuitt went deep into the playoffs, so I saw a lot of those games. I'm around Katuitt's organization, so I have some insight just the type of kid he is. Been on the field with him, multiple times. He just gets his barrel in the best positions. He gets in great hitting positions. You slow down his video. I've had plenty of open face shots that I've dropped over the last last year or so of him. But you just see where his hands are in position and his gait, just everything is aligned. And I swear every game he would have some barrel contact off the bat. He may pull it sometimes a little bit, and so it may end up going foul. But I think he sent more balls out of the park that were just barely foul down the line in some of these Cape parks than anybody. And he showed some power. I think he's going to show more. And there might be some adjustments that get made to that load. But you go back and you look at Bo Bichette's swing. He was a little bit younger, but as a prep player, very similar, kind of really high hands, kind of an unusual setup. Got some of that in line with him. They both have a lot of bat speed. And yeah, I like Eric Brown just as a. I think he's going to be a great fantasy value because he's probably not going to get shoved up a ton of lists with the prep kids and the high end, college guys. And you can sneak him probably toward the end of the back end of the first round if you're like a competing team. One of those guys where you just let the good players fall to you and let it pay dividends. It's a great place to be in FYPD. I'm not going to lie. Just let the guys fall and be like, I didn't think this guy would be here. It's where the rich get richer in these drafts.
Absolutely. I do want to talk about Cooper Jerpy in a second, but you've been doing some really interesting research just in terms of how amateur pitchers tend to add velocity once they get into pro ball. And when you first kind of mentioned that to me, anecdotally, it just totally checks out, right? Like there's just so many examples you can think of. Can you kind of talk about that research and maybe if there's any pitchers who you think it absolutely is going to apply to in this year's class?
Yeah. The thing that I really tried to focus on was college pitchers in particular, because it's hard for us to really know what some of these prep kids sit in game. Like if we had high school data of like their high school spring season, then I would be able to really measure it. I think what we see on the high school side is the guys that throw 89 and 91 but have good mechanics and projectable bodies. Those are the guys that have velocity. The guys that are sitting 95 to 99, whatever plus, they can lose a few ticks as they go on. A lot of them deal with injuries too. So sometimes that's like a warning sign, like those hard throwing right-handers, we have numerous examples. So college guys are a little different. And I think it's because those guys in particular develop at so many different rates. They're not the guys that necessarily are peaking physically at 18 years old. It's a lot of the time why they get to school. A lot of the time it's why they get to schools that aren't necessarily Power 5 schools or high-end Power 5 schools. And we just talked about earlier the amount of training and nutrition. Some of these guys go to schools where they actually have to be students, believe it or not.
That's insane.
I know, imagine. So you start to look at it and there are so many examples. So when I dug into it and we looked at the sample that I grabbed, is because 2020 in terms of the draft was limited but to 5 rounds. So I picked the first 50 college pitchers taken, figuring they had some pedigree. They were guys that were considered pretty good. And more often than not, we're going to have the backing of their team in the early stages of their pro development, because there was some bonus money that was put out, and teams want to get some value out of that, right? It's a pretty easy thing to assume. They're not, late round guys they took a shot on that an area guy liked or whatever, that maybe has to, do a little bit, unfortunately, more of the work themselves. It's not how it always is, but there's certainly some examples, and you can go, and if you follow minor league baseball, I'm sure there's plenty that you can pick out. But so I figured top 50 guys in 2019 and 2020, and I sort of combined them. I took a look at what their average velocity was in their draft spring. Now, sometimes like a guy like Graham Stitson was down a lot in his draft spring. So, I wanted to bring that up as well. I kind of gave some examples from the article, some guys who were kind of outliers and like, hey, they're in this numbers. I concluded them, but let's also consider this. But just on its face, of those 100 players, 57 added velocity. I think that, or maybe it was more than that. 67 after added velocity. It was 50 players that added a mile per hour or more. There were 27 that added 2 miles per hour or more, which was even to me, like having followed it and kind of like thought, hey, all these guys are adding velocity. It was still shocking. And we didn't factor in the 2021 class where there's a bunch of guys like Gordon Graceffa who's added like 5 miles per hour of velocity, as well as others. And there's still some to come, I'm sure. So it was really amazing to see like over a quarter added multiple ticks onto their velocity. There's some guys like Matt Brash that added like 4 or 5, which to me kind of was interesting to take a step back and look at Brash after his struggles and think, this guy moved so quick his stuff took such a big jump. Maybe there's still some time for him to figure some things out, even if it's as a reliever. Just because he's only had that stuff for such a short window of time, especially when you consider the 2020 shutdown and when he got drafted, etc. So yeah, there were a lot of guys that it was like, all right, so who can add velocity in this class? Kumar's already there in terms of velocity. I don't necessarily know if he needs to. Cade Horton is like a year removed from TJS or whatever. And I think if you look at some of his early numbers in the spring, they weren't great, but they were almost like rehab outings. Once it all sort of came together and his best velocity was there and clicked, he's a guy, I think, if we just looked at his like playoff velocity average, it probably will maybe jump a little bit, but not a ton. But if we look at like his total draft spring average of the entire season, I bet next year he's going to, or even this year, he's going to be up like 2 miles per hour. He's going to be up a little bit because he has legitimate arm strength. Jerpy is a guy that, as I mentioned in the article, when he came out of Driveline last year, and he didn't do velocity training, I wanted to make that sort of clear. He went there to improve his slider shape and make his changeup, his off speed, a little bit sharper. So that's all he did. His program was focused on, but they do a lot of the biomechanical stuff, and they work on some of those, tweaks in terms of your mechanics to get you a little bit more direct and more efficient. And he hit 98 in a short stint in the fall, and he's been up more than that. So, he's a guy that can add 2 to 3 miles per hour without losing any of that shape and deception that he has. Him at 2 to 3 is like other guys at like 5 to 6, just in terms of how that fastball plays. And he's got the changeup to play off of it. And he's got the slider that sweeps. So he's got all these different weapons that he can utilize. And he's a really intelligent kid. I was excited to get, an opportunity to talk to him for a little bit and just about his approach and the things that he's looking forward to pro ball. It was actually the day before the draft or 2 days before the draft that I talked to Cooper. It was like the last thing I did, and then finished the article, and we had it posted within an hour. Other guys that could potentially add velo, we'll see with Sims. I mean, he was a reliever earlier. He was throwing hard this summer. Thomas Harrington seems like a guy that could potentially add velocity, coming from a smaller school. He was a teammate of Zach Netto's at Campbell. He's a guy that can add velo. Justin Campbell could absolutely add velocity. Jake Bennett, I think. Hunter Barco, we were kind of starting to see him add a little velo. Prelip only has 40 college innings, and he was younger. I think he'll probably end up being up. He kind of fits into that mold of like a Spencer Steer, a guy that was injured but had stuff. And so we never really saw the high amount of power that he had. Adam Mazur is really talented. Parker Messick's a guy that could add velocity. And the last one I'll say is Bryce Hubbard, who I absolutely love. He's one of my favorite pitchers in the draft. Really engaging kid. Has an incredible understanding of pitching, metrics, training, what he's doing when he's out there. And I think with professional game calling in an organization that, regardless of, some of the shakeups the Reds have had over the last year, they still have internally like Eric Jagers and some of these guys, Johnson, who are incredible pitching instructors that really have helped a lot of their arms develop into better pitchers. I think Bryce Hubbard could not only add velocity, I think we're going to see the variation of breaking balls that I saw on the Cape last year that just frankly weren't as called as much. If you have an old school manager, which Martin, who's no longer there, kind of falls in line with that, who's calling one all the time, and you're just throwing 60, 70% fastballs, you're going to get hit eventually because guys can hit fastballs. He's got a good one. He adds a couple ticks, and they let him throw his secondaries a little bit more because he's got two variations of the curveball. One that's a little bit has more depth, a little bit slower. One that's a little bit harder, and then he's got a sweep and slider that he was showing on the Cape last year. He didn't throw as much this spring. I really think this is a kid that can develop into a really interesting, like maybe a mid-rotation arm, maybe a number 4. He's a little bit undersized, but he's a lefty. He's a bulldog. He's a competitor, and he's a smart kid that knows what he's doing. So Hubbard's my guy. So I'm going to beat the drum on that one again. It was a great pick by Cincinnati.
So back to Drippy quickly, because you sold me offline maybe a week or two ago about his secondaries, just because I raised some concerns about the average velocity on his secondaries. And, after talking it out with you, you sold me on the slider. Specifically, is he, for first-year player drafts, is he your top pitcher in this class?
Oof.
Kumar Rocker is going to probably have the highest first-year player draft ADP among pitchers, I think, just especially with him going third and everyone.
I think it's going to be Rocker. But man, I don't know. The health stuff scares me a little bit. And some of the things that I've heard, and I'm sure, more and more is still coming to light just with some of the stuff they went through with the shoulder, etc. So it scares me a little bit. I think as far as the college pitchers, you can make a case for Cade Horton. I'm crazy enough to take Cooper Jerby over Kumar Rocker, frankly. I don't know if everybody else is going to be. I don't mind being, standing alone like the cheese on that one. But
the nice thing,
yeah, it's funny because he's the kind of guy where, like, once again, like, I'm happy to sit at the back end of a first year player draft and take Jerby, like, let him fall into my lap, let somebody else. It's good, but I think, like, the top guys should probably be Dylan Lesko and Owen Murphy in terms of, like, who you're going to draft for upside. And we've seen the top prep arms over the last couple of years, by and large, have been pretty good. They've at least gotten to the major leagues, even dating back to, like, Matthew Liberatore. I have, like, one league I think I held on to Liberatore in, and, like, yeah, I mean, he's just kind of touching the majors now, but probably will be a starter, and, like, you're going to get some innings out of it. And there's some trade value that, especially in, like, deeper leagues, like, we playing 20 plus and 30s, you need arms. So yeah, I mean, I think I'd still go with, like, the prep arms over these guys, but yeah, I like Jerby and Cade Horton as much as any of them. Cade Horton just has probably the highest upside, just based on pure stuff. Even as a Jerby fan, it's hard for me to deny that. Like, that guy had nasty stuff. Like, he was tremendous in the playoffs, and we saw how good that fastball and slider combination could be. And I think he's got the possibility to develop, a third pitch more the further and further away from surgery he is. So I'm really interested to see what he does. And the Cubs have been pretty good with development over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and Horton obviously peaked late, but he also peaked against really, really good hitters. And so, I mean,
on the biggest stage.
It's nice, for first year player drafts. Like, I think the best value is often on the pitching side, because people want to take hitters. And if you kind of identify someone like Jerby, I also I love Brandon Barriera, who went to Toronto. I think that's a great landing spot for him.
Yep. Oh yeah, another one.
If you identify a pitcher who you really like, that's not sort of in the Jack Leiter type of in terms of hype, because people take a Jack Leiter top 5, top 6. People are probably going to take a Kumar Rocker top 5, top 6. But if you can identify a pitcher that you love who's going to be there at pick 15 or pick 22 of your first year player draft, to me, that's where the value is. I mean, that's where you could get guys like Alek Manoah and George Kirby in past years, because everyone wants to chase the high upside guys. And to me, I would take the college guys, I think, over the prep guys that you mentioned, even though maybe they do. I mean, Lesko has just a ridiculously high ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you might get the discount there because of the injury, but Lesko is one of those guys where it's just really hard for me to remove the fact that this is one of the best prep arms we've seen, and then take a step back and say, like, Andrew Painter, been pretty good. Mick Abel, been pretty good. We've seen a lot of these, like, top prep arms have been like, all right, like, there's legitimate stuff there. It's translating, and he was so high end. I think he's been sort of groomed for this for 2 years, and unfortunately he had the injury, because that last start he had at NHSI was an absolute, like, breakout. Everyone was, like, ranting and raving. It's up on the Baseball America site, and I mean, he looked awesome. I mean, he looked like he was going to go in the top 5.
I just don't like waiting. I don't like I don't like having to wait 3 or 4 years on a
Mm.
pitching prospect that I have to take like top 20 in a first year player draft. Like if I get, like I could probably get Barriera in
Yeah.
pick 30 in a first year player draft, and that's
Yeah, you probably can. And I think that's why like I tend to kind of operate on the fringes here too, where like a lot of my second and third round picks in drafts and fourth round picks are from the pitching classes. Whether it's, I would target a guy like Robbie Snelling, who's another prep guy. I named all the college guys that I like. But like Adam Mazer is probably going to be underrated from Iowa. You'll be able to get him like pretty late. Cole Phillips, another guy from the prep arm, but like has like a ton of insane stuff. So like, yeah, you might wait a few years on that, but then there's plenty of college guys that are, sort of hanging around the back end too. Like Drew Thorpe is pretty good. Like I said, Connor Prelip, if he's back and healthy and throwing, he was a guy that was considered the top 10 pick at points in this cycle, really early on a few years ago before the injuries. Justin Campbell has a ton of upside. He's a big, 6'7" guy that was a two-way player up until this year. Landon Sims, so it's just like there's so much value in the college classes in general, that I think, even beyond the first couple of rounds, there's going to be a couple of guys, that potentially pop. Andrew Taylor, is another one. There's a bunch.
What do you think about Carson Wisenhud? Because obviously he was.
Yeah.
Did you see him on the Cape?
I saw his opening start and got COVID. Seriously, I tested positive like 2 days later, and it was like a dozen scouts I know all like got sick at that game in Chatham. But yeah, I saw him against Cam Collier actually. And then like I just was plugged in with scouts and TrackMan, etc. that saw other starts. So fastball command for me was bad. He flashed the changeup. He didn't throw many good curveballs. It's still there. Like there's 3 potential average or better pitches. The changeup's probably plus. Fastball could be above average. I've heard that there was one start where he was throwing good breaking balls, but everything else was off. Never really put it together. So like the pitchability side of it wasn't necessarily there. The execution side of it wasn't there. But the physic, like he's still pretty physical. And yeah, I think, with San Francisco and they've done a pretty good job of pitching development. They got another kid that I really like, Will Kempner, who throws like 95 to 99 miles per hour from like a true like sidearm slot. Like he's like way down here, it's almost like a submarine delivery. Like he throws heat. So San Francisco like kind of went after some interesting arms. They got Reggie Crawford, who, when all's said and done, if Reggie is healthy and he signs, number one, but Reggie's healthy, and we actually see him develop as a pitcher because he's had such little track record as a pitcher. And I've seen him pitch in high school. I saw him pitch over the 2020 pandemic in the Futures League. I saw him pitch last summer before he went to the college national team. He's got like a 25 to 2600 RPM fastball that sits 97 and 99 with 19 inches of induced vertical break. Like he's a freak fastball. It's an alien fastball. There aren't many fastballs like that like in the world anywhere. And then he's got a hammer curveball that's like 2,800 RPMs, absolutely drops off of a table. He throws it hard. There's probably more velocity there. And he's barely been developed as a pitcher. He's mostly been a power hitting first baseman where, oh yeah, he's probably got 70 raw power as well. There's some swing and miss there. But, so I don't know how they develop him. I don't know if he's going to stay as a two-way guy, but he has the potential to be the best college pitcher in the draft. He's a guy that in fantasy, honestly, if he's sitting there like, middle of your second round or something, start of your third, I'd take a flyer on Reggie Crawford. There's like a ton of upside there. And even some upside as like a two-way guy. And I think that's where like there's depth in this class. Like you go into the 4th round, there's guys like Jake Madden, who is a JUCO dude, 6'6", really good stuff. If the command is there, man, he's like great, So, the Angels have been pretty good with pitching development over the last year or so, moving these guys along quickly. Is he a guy that could that could click. Alex McFarland has insane stuff. If that could really click, if Trey Dombrowski gets his velocity up, that could be good. Spencer Miles had big stuff out of Missouri. He was another he was a San Francisco pick. There's so many guys in like this 3 to 6 round range that like it's one of the reasons I love 30-team leagues and really deep leagues with deeper minor league systems, because those are the guys that I really like to take chances on. I mean, Ricky Tiedemann would have been one of those guys last year, and that's where the true values I think come from. And sometimes it might just be a guy that shows up in pro ball and still has some innings left in his arm and absolutely shoves an A ball and gets on our radar.
So let's close out with I want to ask you about 3 more hitters. I'm actually going to just lump them all in on the same question, and you can kind of go where you want. But I was already kind of getting pretty high on Sterling Thompson, and then he lands with Colorado, and I'm excited about the batting average potential there, especially if he can tap into more power. I hadn't really done much prep on Spencer Jones or Xavier Isaac, but I think the Jones landing with the Yankees is a really interesting fit, given that they've developed, Aaron Judge, and obviously that's a type of player they love, lefties in Yankee Stadium. Obviously that's great. And then just watching video on Xavier Isaac, I'm in on Xavier Isaac. I know that was kind of considered a reach in real life, but just that type of raw power, it's pretty alluring. Do you have any thoughts on Thompson or Jones or Isaac?
Yeah, in terms of Jones, I saw Jones a lot last year in the Cape Cod League. He was a teammate of Neto's. Power is unbelievable, and he's a guy, a two-way guy as a prep. Kind of finally was fully developed as a hitter over the last year or two, and we've seen him make tremendous growth in leaps and bounds. Doesn't chase all that much. Obviously, he's 6'7". I mean, he's massive. He can cover the plate and then some if he needs to. Just a matter of ironing out the swing and miss, as would be expected with someone with levers that are that long. He's an unbelievable athlete. He's a plus runner. He can play center field. He's got an arm. It's still coming back. He had, an elbow issue, and that's one of the skills that, potentially could blossom. I mean, we could see a guy that gets that arm strength back all the way. Doesn't always happen with outfielders, but if he does and he gets back to having even like an above average to maybe plus arm in the outfield, he's going to be able to play anywhere. In terms of range, like he's got plenty of range. It doesn't make sense, but he's a good base stealer. This is a 6'7", 230-pound man. And when he gets into the ball, I mean, he just actually absolutely cranks it. He's a left-handed bat as well, left-handed throwing. So if he had to move to first base long-term, that's not going to be an issue. He'll fit that profile, though. I don't think he'll slow down that much. He'd be a really athletic first baseman. He's a really interesting player. There's a ton of upside there. I'm excited to see how the Yankees develop him. And then who was the first one that you mentioned? Sorry.
Marilyn Thompson, Florida.
Oh, Sterling Thompson. Yeah, Thompson just has, an innate combination of power, bats of ball skills. You can make an argument he was one of the best sort of hitters, statistically in the draft.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I think people maybe on some of the public scouting reports I read were unsure about how much power was coming, but I love the fact that the hit tool is as far along as it already is.
Yeah, there's I think that, the power, hit 11 homers, that will still come. He's not maxed out yet. Decent body to project. He's strong. He doesn't swing and miss, and he walks. High-end hit tool, and I tend to trust guys like that. Tend to believe in players like that, especially guys that have played in high-level conferences. He's got a 954 OPS over his career, over 120 games with Florida. Was a draft eligible sophomore. So he's another college hitter that we're like, yeah, I mean, I'm totally in on that one. Like, 100% for sure. I like Drew Gilbert too. It's kind of another aside. And then Xavier Isaacs is interesting because we got some information throughout the night that Tampa thought that there was another team that was in on Isaacs within the top 50 before the next time that Tampa drafted, and or what it was before they were gonna pick again, and they sort of knew they had to make this deal happen. And I think what they did was they'll probably sign Brock Jones for like an overslot deal in the second and move some of that bonus money around. But in terms of the blast data that I've seen, and bat speed data, like all that sort of stuff, like it's crazy power.
Yeah.
He could be a really exciting hitting prospect. So like, yeah, maybe it's off the board because you're not going to rank like a high school first baseman with power like within your top 70 players most of the time. Like just know where it is. I think we had him at like 90, 91 in our top 500. So like he was like, a top 3-round guy. We knew he was good, but it's just a tough profile. But it's the mechanics of the draft, and it's what makes the MLB draft sort of interesting in this bonus pool era is how the money gets moved around and shaped, and some picks get made so guys have value, are able to get value at another round and move some money along, and it's what makes the board so difficult to mock versus maybe other sports where you're probably pretty sure on top 10 picks sometimes within the day or so leading up to the draft. Sometimes deals are even announced, and it just doesn't seem to happen in baseball.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't have the data that you have on Isaac, but I mean, it's almost one of those things where I don't even need the data because I can just sort of see I can see how
exactly
all, and it's just like holy crap. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's just that's such a fantasy over reality profile, but I think the fact that he and obviously things will change, like we'll get more data on these guys once the hitters, at least once they start playing in games, and if he goes out and just destroys complex league pitching this summer, you aren't going to be able to get him at a steal necessarily, but I mean I could see him hitting enough the rest of the season where he's the guy that people are considering in the top 10 of first year player drafts, just because that power is just so it's really tough to find someone else in this class that has that type of power potential.
There's some really, I honestly think the depth of this particular draft is the college hitting. I think it was better than last year's, and more often than not, if that is the strength of or the foundational strength, we'll say in numbers of a draft class, I tend to think it translates pretty well to FYPD, because then you get a lot of value down the board. You get guys that maybe they're not superstars, but they could fit major league roles long term and potentially contribute, or just have value like a top 200 to 250 prospect, especially as we play in deeper and deeper dynasty formats. Those guys have a little bit more value, especially if they're guys that move quickly or they're guys that break out. Look at Zach Geloff.
Yeah. I mean, this is a class where obviously you want a chance at Drew Jones, but I mean, I'd love to have multiple second round picks in a first year player draft, or even, a second round pick and 2 third round picks or something like that. Cause there's going to be so much talent available into the 30s. And obviously you're going to get someone that you might have ranked, 20th. You might be able to get that guy at pick like 42 or something. So I'm excited. This is a really, really fun class, Geoff. I'm really excited that you're able to hop on in your busy schedule. Is there anything you want to promote that you got going on at BA?
Yeah. We did a ton of content for the futures game. We're going to have a ton of interviews coming out with players that should be pretty good. A lot of insight there. Every single pitcher, I went through their entire pitch mix and got grips. So we're going to have, and they put them up to the camera, and we have some zoom ins and stuff like that. So that should be really good. Just working my cape stuff. So obviously handling all that stuff right now. And I have my kids fighting upstairs. I think that's great. So I have the Cape All-Star game coming up this weekend. So I'm looking forward to being out there, and I'll be on the field for the Home Run Derby and BP, probably doing some interviews as well. Plus, I'll have all the great Cape video that I put out when I'm at games. So I'll be back doing that. And then we had a ton of draft content, and we're going to have a lot of draft wrap-up content coming out. And then as these guys sign, we're going to have them out of the top 30s. And oh, by the way, before we flew out to California the week prior, we had just finished updating all of our team top 30 boards in preparation for the draft and the trade deadline. So go and read them now, because as these players sign, some of the guys at the back end who are top 30 worthy are going to have to get bumped, right, with some of these top picks. So we have so much sort of like there and sort of hanging out that it's so much content. We've been crushing it over the last couple of weeks. Thanks for having me on, man.
Dude, I'm so excited. The content's been great. I love reading everything you're doing over there, and I'll be back next week with the mailbag episode, and I'm hoping that the top 400 update will be done in time for that. But we'll see on that. But it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a big time update. Thanks for everyone for watching and for listening, and we'll be back next week.